The last couple of years for the health industry, amongst others, has been pretty turbulent, pretty bumpy. So now, what is the future going to be looking like? So is there opportunities ahead, or what is the turbulence that's out there? To pilot our next roundtable, we are in the safe hands of the managing partner of Sofinnova, Cédric Moreau, and his panel.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to moderate and share this panel about the COVID wake-up on health tech innovation investment, and to deal with the opportunities, but also the turbulence that maybe we have all a bit underestimated last year when we presented such a similar panel. So I'm very pleased to introduce the speakers. So we have on my left Joe Costa, who is a principal at Apollo. Thank you to be there. You came from the US, so thank you for being present. We have Elena Coluccelli, managing partner, healthcare M&A, and particularly focused on SME at Rothschild & Co. Thank you, Elena, to be there. We have Aniz Girach to deal with all the regulatory and clinical aspects. Aniz is a CMO at ProQR, a NASDAQ-listed company. And thank you also, because I know you are based in the UK, so thank you so much to be present and on the stage with us. And finally, last but not the least, we have Yann Flohic, who is Deputy Chairman of the Board at Life Science Acceleration Alliance. And I think we'll know more about this new initiative and how you want to push and put the voice of the VC voice at the European level. So we have a quite busy schedule, but quite exciting, and I'm happy to start with you, Joe. And once again, thank you to be there. So we can just start to, of course, Apollo is a name that everybody has in mind, but just if you can give us a quick snapshot, overview about what you are doing as one of the biggest alternative financing group in the world, and really that the audience is well aware about who you are and what you are doing.
Great, Cédric, and thanks again for having me. So just a brief snapshot on Apollo. Founded in 1990, a global firm today with over 2,000 employees based all around the world, headquartered in New York, but significant presence here in Europe with our European headquarters in London. We have over 500 billion of AUM today, spread across 3 core buckets. Our largest bucket is the yield category. Think of credit investing powered by our global insurance franchise. It's over 350 billion of AUM today. On the other end of the spectrum is our private equity and equity franchise, for which we're probably most well known, which is 80 billion today, a bit over. And sitting in between is our hybrid bucket, which really is meant to span everything from debt-like equity and equity-like debt. We find that's actually one of the most interesting and growing parts of the ecosystem today. And really, you know, I think why we're on this panel is because healthcare sits across all of our ecosystem and is a core strategic theme for us at Apollo. You know, on the private equity side, we are focused mostly on cash flowing businesses, more mature, with commercial products, both in services and in branded pharma. In hybrid, the bucket, we have spent time assessing innovation. However, to date, have only invested predominantly in healthcare services. On the yield product, we have spent quite a bit of time across all parts of the healthcare ecosystem, powered in large part by our mid-cap partnership, which invests in venture debt for the biotech space, predominantly in the US, but multiple billions of dollars across the ecosystem in healthcare. And we were excited to announce our partnership with Sofinnova in May of this year, which really was after a long, thoughtful evaluation of the landscape and how to grow in a sector that we are highly confident in has long-term secular tailwinds, thought that a partnership with a best-in-class a manager like Sofinnova, with really a global reach and a very unique platform here in Europe, was a great way to bring the best of our two partnerships together. So that's a little bit of an Apollo and sort of overview.
Joe, so the title of our roundtable is a bit about this wake-up call for the industry once we had this COVID-19 outbreak. So how you internally at Apollo and strategically did this COVID-19 outbreak accelerate or not, or change a bit your perspective or your appetite for innovation in that space? Because you as you said, you are already quite involved in the healthcare sector prior to that, but I wanted just to know if it changed something strategically at Apollo level.
No, it's a great question. I think before COVID, it was very clear that healthcare in general and pharmaceuticals in particular have a very powerful, as I said, secular tailwind. And the innovation, the pace of innovation has only accelerated. It was accelerating before COVID. And I just think the awareness and importance was obviously magnified in COVID. And so the focus was there, but I do think COVID helped amplify the urgency of the need to innovate in healthcare. Obviously now we're sitting, as you kind of framed the conversation, having this discussion a year ago was a different environment for healthcare valuations and kind of the euphoria around kind of the long-term vision and euphoria, or in healthcare. I would say for us at Apollo, we are, we're probably best known as being value investors where purchase price matters. And so periods of dislocation actually makes us more excited to invest in the themes that we believe have very strong tailwinds behind them. And so I would put healthcare at the top of that list. And today we're seeing more opportunities that for companies to utilize our sort of flexible structures across those three buckets I mentioned earlier.
And so if we continue, because we were very pleased with this partnership at Sofinnova with you guys at Apollo, but we have seen also some other deals that were more acquisition than partnership. We have seen AQT with LSP, having worked with Carlyle, just to mention these two recent deals. So how do you see this global trend, and do we have to understand that there is also an appetite to source the innovation, fill the pipeline for potential also acquisition synergies with your existing portfolio?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think that the activity in the space is emblematic and evidence of the value of these sorts of partnerships. I think legacy private equity, our background is more, again, on cash flowing businesses. And at least here at Apollo, we know what we don't know. We're not scientists. Typically, I don't know that we have any PhDs in our ranks at Apollo. But when you think about the specialized skills that are needed to evaluate innovation in the space, it was quick in our strategic evolution and evaluation that between building and partnering, the partnering route was would be the most efficient path. We took a different approach than some of our peers in taking a minority interest, but really what was important there was the collaboration that was like the like-mindedness of our partners, knowing that really what was special about Sofinnova was its culture, its brand. Honestly, 1972 was the founding of Sofinnova, so it's been around longer than Apollo. And so for our approach was a little bit of a nuance on what some of others have done in the space, but still very much about integrating the specialized knowledge to the broader platform. And again, I think we are already seeing the benefits of that as we think about our investments and our evaluation of opportunities across private equity, hybrid, credit, real estate, this integrated flywheel effect of bringing in specialized knowledge was critical to bring, I think, the capital solutions to bear that are unique for the large global alternative asset managers.
Great. So HTID is really a European event and spotlight that we want to have every year in Paris, and really put all the stakeholders together. And I would like to have your point of view from, of course, a big organization as you, but many from the outside of the Atlantic. How do you see our old continent, Europe, in terms of science, in terms of innovation, in terms of price? Because what's something that strikes me when I talk about Abingworth, about LSP or Sofinnova, we are all based in Europe. And so are we so attractive? And if yes, why?
Well, other than coming to Paris more frequently, which is a big draw, I think, for some of us. When we look at the space, innovation is so robust here. I mean, when you actually look at the number of interesting research papers and the university activity here in Europe, I would say it's on par, if not slightly better than the US. I think where there's been a disconnect a bit is on the translation of that innovation into kind of commercial opportunities and kind of capital, access to capital. Again, we see that as an opportunity because really the talent is remarkable here. I think what scares folks from the US sometimes is that it's a different coverage model, right? I mean, when you think about to be effective in Europe, Europe isn't monolithic. It really is a local market by local market set of relationships and understanding the regulatory regimes, et cetera. US is, while San Francisco and Boston would like to say that they're different, they operate within a bit of the same ecosystem, so capital seems a bit more flexible there. And also I would say just the opportunities to take companies public in the US versus in Europe. Europe has more local market public listings rather than sort of a kind of one-stop shop for tapping public markets. So I think those elements evolve over time, and I think what some of we at Apollo and some of our peers have seen is those are hopefully temporary issues and even opportunities. Whereas sourcing the best talent and partnering with the best companies, and frankly, the history of pharmaceutical innovation is so robust in Europe just because of the major players who have played. The big pharma in Europe is a source of both acquisitions for biotech as well as partnership and collaboration. So we really like being here in Europe in partnership with you. Again, know what we don't know. We've spent a lot of time in Europe as a firm. Our presence in France is kind of long and have done multiple transactions here in France outside of the healthcare space. So we like Europe in general. Now bringing that to innovation and healthcare in particular, we're very excited to be here in a more robust way.
Great. Maybe one last question, Joe. You mentioned, yes, this kind of business model from the biotech to be at some of time acquired or signing some deals. Maybe another opportunity we can discuss, and with the presence of folks as you that could really put a lot of money at work, is also how we can help our company to, because it's a long-term game, so to scale and to grow faster. Here also at HTID, we mainly promote quite advanced biotech and medtech and digital companies. So how do you see also this ability also to bring more capital at work, particularly in Europe, to build really the future champions and not just waiting for the next M&A exit or partnership to help to find a proper exit?
It's a really great question. And I think when capital is plentiful, folks sort of just go to the regular playbook and they say, okay, raise equity rounds at increasing valuations. It's easy, it's tried, true, and tested. I think what's really important in a moment like this is to have companies step outside of that typical playbook and seek out capital that's potentially more structured, more flexible, but maybe a little bit further afield from what they're used to. But I think what is critical is to keep supporting and funding innovation. Because this, as we all know, it takes a long time for kind of dreams to become reality in this space. And what is more critical... And
selling the dream is not enough.
Yeah, well, you're better at that than I am. But I will say that it is... capital can be an enabler to that. And we think at Apollo we're really thoughtful and unique around being able to deliver the right capital solution for the right moment in time for the right management team and company. And so, evolving the conversation to support great innovation in times of turbulence, I think is really critical.
Thank you so much. Very, very interesting, and I think very encouraging to see people as you interested by Europe, interested by science, interested by funds as Sofinnova to help us to build this ecosystem. So thank you so much.
And thanks very much for having me.
Now we can switch with Elena. So Elena, I can invite you to go here. So I think with you, Elena, I think what will be interesting is that you can bring your global point of view and pictures about what's happened on the market. And maybe I think what would be interesting is to see how we have all in mind that healthcare is a resilient and defensive sector, which could be true for the large organization, pharma, but we have seen also that for biotech in the last 12 and even 18 months, it was more difficult. So how you can deal with that and give us a bit more insight from your point of view as a Rothschild and advising all these SMEs company in a more challenging context.
Sure, thanks, Cédric. So hello to everyone. Maybe before I answer straight the question, a little background on the situation more general on the market, because the title of this panel is about COVID. Obviously COVID, well, we think it's the big crisis is behind, let's see. So at that point of time, when we were during the COVID peak, the stock markets have reacted, of course, but then the market has picked up quite quickly just afterwards, because we were in an environment where liquidity was still quite high. And in particular, interest rates were low, and so there's a double effect. Stock market has rebounded, quite quickly, in particular in certain sectors, and healthcare was one of those. And on top of that, 2021 and also somehow 2022 were a record year for fundraising in the private equity market and in the venture capital markets, with specialized funds that have raised particular money in pharma, in healthcare. So that's what we have observed. What we are observing now is a little bit different. We'll see it in the slide. Because now we are going into a phase where there will be more a kind of liquidity low effect. Interest rates are going up. And so this has a double effect both on the stock market and on the private equity market. Obviously, defensive sector are more protective, and so we see a flow of funds going into those defensive sector. But the perception of risk from investors has increased, and so biotech has been effectively a little bit more impacted rather than medtech or digital health, for example. So if I just show you maybe a few slides here. So here, in terms of key takeaway, I've already summarized, but we see the effect of the central bank U-turn and the fact that interest rates have raised to counterattack the inflation that has increased as well. And so this has all the effect that I already touched. And here maybe what we see more visually is the flight to safety towards some defensive sector. So although healthcare has decreased as well, if we see the performance, it's not green as it was in before, but it's performing better than much other sectors. So it's number 3, number 1 being oil and gas for the reason I don't have to explain, I guess. So then obviously you have all the effect of the Russia-Ukraine conflict that has a big effect on commodities, price, inflation, and this has an impact also in other segments of healthcare, because sometimes we used to say that healthcare is defensive and is not touched by all the macroeconomic effect, but it's actually, if you look at in details, it's not really true. If you look at medtech, for example, medtech is quite impacted by the increase of resources, and gross margin are quite impacted too. Biotech, we have a dedicated slide afterwards. So here is more the private markets. So the VC companies have continued to support biotech. At the end of the day, once again, because there has been 2021 and 22 have been a record year for fundraising, and in terms of split of where the flows goes by therapeutic areas, oncology is still the first one, despite the fact that COVID should have improved the number of fundraising in other areas, in particular infectious disease. Oncology is still almost half.
So, if we can make a pause here, so how do you see the ability for this biotech company in a more challenging environment? You talk about inflation, interest rates, access to capital, liquidity. So we have on the chart that it seems that the capital is still here in private, but quite difficult to raise and to access on the public side. So how you advise your company? Is it really a cash preservation mode? Are you able to structure differently your deals with a mix of dilutive, non-dilutive? Yeah. I would like to know more about your interaction with your clients and SMEs.
Sure. Yeah, definitely deals have become more creative and complex because, well, we are in an environment where normally we should go into fundamentals now because somehow, all the abundance of liquidity is not anymore there, but investors don't like fundamentals, so they always try to find new and more creative structure to do deals. Wow. And so effectively we are seeing when we advise companies that want to raise money, we try to have a multi-strategy. So not just to focus on fundraising through the the VC or the private markets. Obviously the public market is closed right now, so it's very difficult. I mean, it's not possible to go public, but we try to look at other alternatives that exist already before, but even more today, we push our clients to look at licensing deal, at royalties back type of financing deal as well, that are coming back quite much. And also, as you said, non-dilutive, because aside from venture loan, which exist from not just now, they already exist. We have seen a lot of also banks, like traditional banks, having a more focused policy to accompany innovation. So sometimes biotech don't think about that, but we can mix equity and non-dilutive also with traditional bank. Of course, it's a big work. It has to be prepared in advance to have good contacts and entertain relationship with your partners. But we try to diversify all these sources because it's very difficult just to focus on equity today.
Most of the time when we have this different and more difficult situation and environments, we have some discussion, investors, bankers, company, when the pharma will move and when the pharma will deploy all this capital. And we know that there are also a kind of 2.0 patent cliff in front of them. So we have seen quite recently, Q2, starting Q3, some deals, but it's not still the jumbo deals. How do you see what could be the catalyst and the time for having more M&A activity that could also refocus a bit the attention and the focus from investor to buy it?
Well, actually, maybe yeah, we have this slide here. We have seen a rebound in M&A activity, actually, in Q2 and Q3 2022. So as you said, pharma companies are, maybe anticipating some patent cliff and coming back to deals, not yet jumbo deals, as the ones that we experienced a few years ago, but still, they are looking for innovation, and there is a lot of innovation, not just pure biotech. The digital health has become a key topic also for pharma. So we are seeing an increasing M&A screening and M&A activity, in particular from the US to Europe. Obviously, the exchange rate is an advantage right now, and so we are seeing a lot of US buyer coming to Europe much more than before. So I think these trends will continue.
Maybe a last question. When I sitting with my CEO and attending the board meeting, I say, in this current context, I think keeping optionality, creating new optionality is absolutely key, and optionality is value. So what could be 1, 2, or 3 advice that you can share with the audience to deal with this challenging period and to save the boat and making sure we can handle this period before having a better time?
It's not an easy question, but because each situation is difficult. But yeah, the advice, very, very, the ones that we try to give is that, first of all, if we are in a phase where cash is very, very important and critical for the development of your company, and you don't have a lot of time in front of you, once again, it's very important to diversify the sources where you can get this cash. So I repeat it again, obviously public sources, but also think about non-dilutive, think about royalties-backed deals, etc. So that's one thing. Then an M&A deal, it's always prepared well in advance. So it's very important also for a young company to entertain a relationship even 2-3 years before there is a true M&A transaction. So that's the other important element. And then the last point is that we think that actually this environment that is a little bit difficult to be read should be more clear maybe in the second half of 2023 or starting from even Q2 2023, because at that point of time the central bank and the interest rate will be much more, I would say, clear. The environment from that point of view will be cleared, and so when you have in a clear environment, then you can take a little bit better your decision to go ahead. So there are 6 months to go where we see a bit of uncertainty, but still, innovation, I think that go a little bit behind that. And if you have an innovative company, you need absolutely to preserve your competitive advantage and do it, with all the means and the different sources of financing I mentioned before.
Thank you so much, Elena, for your all insight, and I think the audience and the company will benefit from your tips. So I invite Aniz to join the podium, and maybe Aniz, as your CMO position, I think let's start with the turbulence, not the opportunity, but how you managed your clinical trials, and probably we can start to give your point of view about patients and clinicians, and then we'll go more about the regulatory agency. But really, what happened in your real life, and give us your testimony and what you had to handle during this period, and particularly with the clinician and the patients.
Sure, and thank you very much, first of all, Cédric, for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And of course, as a physician, it's very nice to be in this very unusual setting as a minority in a meeting like this, but to share my perspective of what's happened over the last 2 to 3 years. Incredible, of course, that we're all here in person at the moment. We wouldn't have thought so even as far as a year ago. So this is an opportunity for us to be able to just really highlight some of the impact that COVID has had. And I will really segment this into the different stakeholders who are really key in our world. The clinicians and the impact of COVID and the turbulence that's happened in their world, the impact on patients, and then also we'll subsequently move on to the regulatory scene as well, and then of course to our industry as well. And of course, from a clinician point of view, this was a bitter blow to being able to perform research. We had an inability to schedule routine visits, routine surgery in general. Overall, there was an impact on all different sectors of the healthcare system, impacting both the staffing levels as well as the patients themselves as well. And of course, from a physician point of view, many physicians died through the COVID pandemic, and they had to deal with many complications as well. We essentially stopped all research trials unless it was deemed to be urgent, and that was a huge impact on the whole of the clinician base. We were struggling at that stage to be able to deal with what's going on. A lot of the clinicians themselves also weren't able to come into the hospitals to be able to serve the needs for the patients as we were moving forward. With regards to clinical trials that the physicians were running, of course, there had to be drastic changes, many important changes. The trials themselves had to have amendments in place, and of course, many visits were also missed as well as a result. There was, of course, ultimately a huge demand and a refocusing of the demand into more urgent healthcare areas in particular. And of course, patients were the primary target of all of this. That's the focus of all of our attention as well. And of course, for them, this was, of course, a double whammy. They were affected by the disease itself and affected by the lack of research that was now subsequently being done in non-urgent areas. Of course, in the COVID areas, there was a huge amount of interest, a huge amount of trials being run there. And therefore, it's really the non-COVID areas that suffered significantly throughout all of this. Routine operating procedures were stopped, of course, and only urgent activities carried on. There was, of course, a huge loss of interest in clinical trial participation by these patients, fueled, of course, in part of the worry of catching COVID as well.
So, thank you. I think it's absolutely true how it was challenging to handle all this trial and interact with the clinician and patients. And now, if we talk about the agencies, because I remind that in pretty March, April 2020, they reacted very quickly and clearly stated that, hey guys, don't worry, we will be quite flexible. We will understand that you will have some gap in your analysis, and let's do your amendments and continue to do what you can do in the current context, and come back with your data, and making sure we will take into account the difficult situation you operate at that time. So what's happened?
So indeed, that was the promise.
Reality.
In reality, things may have happened slightly differently. We find that, like you said, Cédric, both the FDA and EMA reacted very promptly in terms of putting together guidelines for trial participation and allowing clinicians and industry to be able to hopefully get this promise of a lot more flexibility. But actually, what happened in reality was the fact that although guidelines were in place, there was really no lack of leadership at the regulatory level to be able to enforce these. And as we have now subsequently seen this, and I'll talk about this in the next slide or two, but really, as we've now presented the very fragmented data sets to the regulatory bodies, we've realized that actually there is a decrease in the amount of new trials that are being approved. And also there's been a decrease over this COVID period of the amount of approvals for drugs as well. And so indeed, the promise of being much more flexible hasn't quite materialized at the regulatory end. And really that's been a real pity for the industry, because what it's meant is that all the delays in clinical trials that have been there, all the delays in milestones that have occurred have had huge impact on the study integrity. The trial designs have been affected significantly. And whereas we were expecting the regulatory bodies to be sympathetic to this, that's not been the case. The regulatory bodies, in most cases, have actually held us to the same standard as pre-COVID era, which has been very disappointing, of course. And from an industry point of view, the smaller biotechs, and you heard this earlier, the smaller biotechs and startups have been significantly affected. I'm from a small biotech environment also, and we've been significantly affected. At least in our world, we call this the perfect storm at this stage, which is that the post-COVID aftermath, all the delays in the milestones, in terms of achieving milestones for clinical trials, the increased costs of now running and finishing these trials subsequently, and really the loss of value. And then if you couple that with the poor capital markets at the moment and the geopolitical events that are going on, the inability to raise cash has significantly affected a lot of the biotech sector.
So, as I said, I think if we compare with the roundtable last year, I think it's important, and I really enjoyed that we deal with and we make this analysis that probably we have underestimated some collateral impact of this outbreak. Having said that, there is still some optimistic and very positive trend and outcome and takeaway from this period. So if you can end your speech with some positive outlook, would be great.
Sure. So this cloud has got a silver lining, and I think there is importance for us to be able to extract all the optimism that we can out of this and to map out the future as we move forward, because it's important for patients, it's important for the industry as a whole, and I think it's important for all of us as we move forward. So, from a regulatory point of view, if you look at many of the sources now, there are more non-COVID related trials that are being approved, both at the clinical trial applications and IND end, and hopefully with time, the approvals at the other end of the spectrum as well, with NDAs, BLAs, and MAAs as well. But at least we're getting a lot more trials approved at this stage to be able to funnel through into the segments. With the industry, there are many more flexible ways of working now. Many of us have got used to working from home, or at least a hybrid situation. And as much as the different companies are struggling to get us back into the office space, I think there's going to be a happy medium which suits everyone suitably as we move forward. And whether that leads to increased efficiency or not, that's debatable at this stage. But you'd hope that does lead to some kind of efficiency of reducing the amount of commuting time that we all have. And of course, from a biotech, and I'm talking about from a biotech hat on, we're much more cost conscious as we move forward. Having been through the COVID period, it's quite a nice feeling as we move forward to say that this is quite the norm for us now as we move into the post-COVID era. And of course, for the clinician and patient, that's very important. We have very creative solutions that we work through in order to be able to maintain our trial integrity moving forward. For example, we had the ethics committees and IRBs approve online consenting, which was never the case previously. We have, in our patients, at least in ophthalmology, set up home monitoring visits such that through video calling, we can actually have patients use online software to be able to monitor the visual acuity of patients, and indeed also telemedicine. So we have ways of imaging the back of the eye through a remote camera that could be actually attached to a patient's phone and through an app. So these are very creative new ways where we've been forced to develop these ways through the COVID period, but actually now as we come out of COVID, this could be a great opportunity to be able to really improve our efficiency as we move forward. And indeed, even local follow-ups. Patients who have to travel cross-boundary, often they can actually be followed up locally for all the essential visits, and then only come to the main referral center when it's absolutely necessary for treatment, for example. So I think that there's also an increased healthcare awareness in general with all of us. And I'll leave this slide and pause here with the famous words by Anthony Fauci, who's the medical advisor for the US president and the US, of course, we all know what a virus is now. And just to pause there and just to give you an interesting fact, the WHO predicted that pre-pandemic, about 60 to 70% of adults were not aware of what a virus was. And now it says that probably it's less than 10% in the world. So we certainly have a lot more healthcare awareness now than we did before. So that's a positive.
Thank you. Very inspiring statement. So thank you so much, Aniz, for your great speech. So now I invite Yann to join. And so maybe it's a bit trivial, but I cannot resist to the fact that if we make a step back, we can say that biotech literally saved the world. And no biotech with no VC. So I think in a way your initiative with LSA is really to making sure that the voice of the biotech, of the VCs, could really have an impact, and at least at the European level. Can you tell us more about this association and initiative? And to be fully transparent, I'm part of this journey. I'm very happy to help you in that objective.
Yeah, thank you, Cédric. Thank you so much. And again, we are very pleased to be here, especially because we announced the creation of Life Science Acceleration Alliance last year here at HTID free, and we introduced for the very first time our initiative. So what is LSA? This is a coalition of innovators, of venture capitalists, of investors, scientists, business leaders that are dedicated to strengthening the research, the life science research and development in Europe. And our objective is to be, let's say, the collective voice of the early stage venture capital and investors in Europe, because this voice was not heard enough for the moment. And we believe that everyone should have a seat at the table. And the unique perspective of investors and VCs is valuable and must be heard. So furthermore, the critical role of that investment, even how venture capital works, is not always understood by European policymakers. And that's the problem that LSA is aiming to solve. In the next month, at the end of this year or beginning of next year, the European Commission is planning to review its current pharma legislation, which has not been done for the past 20 years. And this is a very particular moment that could either go wrong or right for the life science early stage ecosystem within the EU. It's a great opportunity to change the trends, and I put the figures on the screen. The trends that, for those that enable drug development, and you see that definitely there is a big gap between Europe and the other regions in the world. As part of these well-needed changes, we need the right regulatory framework for innovators and investors to lead to better patient access to medicines, and that's definitely the topic. Currently, the EU commercializing efforts are not strong enough, and when it comes to medical innovation, because of entrepreneurial and capital constraints. And by embracing the life science sector, the EU can generate economic vitality while creating the next generation of life-saving medicines and treatments. So it's a great opportunity for European independence in the pharma sector, for the attractiveness of the continent in terms of investment, the growth of the European biotech innovation ecosystems, and overall for the European global leadership. That's definitely the point.
Thanks. I think we well understand what is the objective and the roadmap. If I'm right, I think one of the first item and kind of battle that you are handling right now and you are embracing is making sure innovation in Europe could be still protected. And we know that last June, in June 17, to be precise, we had an outcome from the WTO regarding some flexibility in the way we can bridge a bit the the vaccines in the future for the next pandemic. So can you tell us more about that and what could be the risk for industry, but also the needs to really making sure we can protect the innovation going forward?
Yeah, definitely. As you said, I mean, at the very beginning of the introduction of this panel, this is a wake-up call. And we need to be aware about what is going on, especially because, as you know, investors and biotech stood up during the pandemic, but the World Trade Organization decided on June 17th to waive intellectual property rules on patents and data on COVID-19 vaccines. And we can say altogether that the can of worms has been opened now, and the process to further undermine the existing patent regulation is ongoing. So this is a wake-up call for all of us. We need to definitely be aware that at the moment the policymakers are driving the extension of the TRIPS waiver into diagnostic and treatments without really understanding its negative impact on the risk assessment and allocation of risk capital in life sciences, not mentioning the result for the patients themselves. So definitely we need to stand and to be alerted about this, because if things are not looking good for the moment, it could eventually get worse with the latest EU Commission proposals. And this morning, Michel Goldman said, for translating scientific discoveries into health technology, IP protection is critical in this complex journey. So, yeah, we are in this situation for the moment. We are already facing access and availability issues because of the inadequate IP protection and insufficient incentive for innovators. But further weakening IP protection and insufficient incentive for innovators is definitely not a sustainable option. So instead, this is likely to accelerate the loss of the European medical innovation and economic growth. And just to come back to what Daniel Cohen said this morning, only early stage funding creates unicorn. And I think this is a strong sentence that we should keep, and at the same time to make sure that we can now react and do things like that. So what I can say at this stage is we are at LSA, we are committed to investors and startups in the early stage life science ecosystem. And our aim is to bring their concerns at the table in order to avoid the worst. And the Inflation Reduction Act that you probably heard in the US is an example of how easily things can go wrong when sweeping changes are happening in the regulatory environment. So we are currently meeting the EU Commission now.
It's good. So it's
to explain
news. It's a breaking news.
To explain our views, to explain your views, to explain definitely your concerns and our solutions, or let's say the global solutions that we should definitely bring to the EU policymakers in order to make sure that we are going to be heard. So I would say that the idea was to introduce our initiative and to say, join us, join our efforts. If we are all together, we'll be stronger in order to bring our concerns to the EU decision makers.
I think thank you very much for this initiative. As you mentioned, I think it's a critical time to making sure our voice, our innovation will be first well understood. And as you said, I think it's a lot of also education, because people in the administration are not it's not so easy to understand how we build our company, how we can preserve our innovation. So I think it's an important point. And as you say, maybe you can say a last word is about this new regulation. Is it an opportunity or more a threat?
I would say that we thought that it was an opportunity, because definitely we need a good framework for boosting the innovation in the life science and for the health tech. But in the same time, as far as we understood, and especially following the first text that we saw from the EU Commission, definitely we could consider that it's a threat, and we should be aware that we need connectively to react, do things. For example, this evening we will have the opportunity to explain you. We've got a cocktail event at 7:40 here, and we can explain you our actions, what we can do all together in order to definitely make sure that we are going to educate the EU policymakers about what is important for investors, for VCs, and how we can definitely boost the investment in Europe and not get our biotech, our entrepreneurs getting funds outside Europe. And that's the objective altogether.
Thank you so much, Yann. So thank you for all the speakers. I think we have covered I think the main topics about the investment from the big guys, the big muscles, accessing and new capital, investing in our industry, and we have to be very happy about that. Elena, that gave us a detailed analysis about how we can help our company to be financed in a more challenging environment and to be creative. I think it's important because usually I was a banker in the past, so I know that banker and creativity is not so obvious usually, but I think we can find with that. So I pointed out this word, and Aniz that gave us testimony about how to manage and leverage the new opportunity, but also how it's always so difficult, but also so important to well prepare our company to deal with the regulatory bodies. Sometimes you can have a great science, a great product, but if you are not able to properly deal with and instill a proper dialogue with these regulatory bodies, it could lead to some setbacks. And Yann, thanks for your initiative. This is truly important because saving innovation, protecting innovation, and making our voice more audible at the European level and be invited at the table, as you said, I think it's just needed, and I think we are credible for that. So thank you so much. There is any final remark or question from the audience? I check. We have still 1 minute. I don't know. Is anybody on the audience? 1, 2, 3. So thank you so much.
We are now going to be taking a break, and we'll be meeting again at 3:25. No, excuse me, at 3:45. We're taking the break now, meeting again at 4:45, where we're going to be listening to a couple of experts in digital health investment. Have a good break.